An article published in the London Evening News in 1964 reported that Queen Victoria once requested £25 back in part exchange for her old billiard table when purchasing a new model, and went on to speculate whether the monarch herself played snooker. It confidently asserts, however, that Charles Dickens used to relax in the evening after a hard day's work on the manuscript of, say, Oliver Twist or Great Expectations, by playing a few frames of snooker on his own billiard table. But was that statement fact or fiction? In this video I'll be looking at what we now know about Charles Dickens and his involvement with cue sports, and more generally at the evolution of snooker, pool and billiards in the mid to late 19th century. That same article refers specifically to the billiard table manufacturers Thurston and Company, who were, in 1964, moving premises, having been located in the heart of London, firstly in Catherine Street just off the Strand, and then on Leicester Square itself, since 1814. The firm can take credit for, amongst other innovations, introducing slate as opposed to wooden beds for the tables, rubber as opposed to padded felt cushions, and for establishing the standard dimensions of the modern billiards table, on which snooker is played. They were suppliers of billiards equipment by appointment to Her Majesty the Queen, as proudly noted in their adverts, and the firm's link to Charles Dickens was confirmed by a cheque for £9 and 1 shilling, dated 1864, and preserved in the company's archive. If we turn to Dickens's letters and banking records, we can piece together a fuller story of Dickens's involvement with Thurston's and the fitting out of the billiard room at his country home, Gads Hill near Rochester. In fact, he also paid for the table by cheque, the sum of £55 and 17 shillings being made out to Thurston's on January the 9th, 1865, when Dickens was halfway through the serialisation of Our Mutual Friend. I wonder if Dickens was inspired to make this purchase, and may even have been given a discount, thanks to the ads for Thurston's tables, which were then appearing month on month in the serialised parts of Dickens's latest novel. The additional cheque of £9 and 1 shilling was for accessories, including cues, rests, marking equipment, and of course, ivory billiard balls. Crucially, we learn from the accompanying letter that Dickens wanted all necessities for pool. Aha! So Dickens was a pool player. But did this make him a 19th century Minnesota Fats, or the equivalent of his young rival, Paul Newman's Fast Eddie character in The Hustler? Hardly, as 8-ball and 9-ball, the most common modern versions of pool, only came into existence at the turn of the 20th century. So what then is the pool that Dickens would have played, and how is it related to the development of modern cue sports? The earliest codified games played with cues, replacing maces, and balls on a tabletop were varieties of billiards, the English version of which is played with 3 balls and 6 pockets, and involves a combination of cannons, striking the cue ball so as to contact the other 2, and pocketing or potting any of the balls. A pot on an object ball being described as a winning hazard, and an in-off with the cue ball, which was a good shot rather than a foul, being known as a losing hazard. Each shot carries a specific point score, and players remain at the table until they either foul or fail to score any points with a shot. The problem with this game as played in the Victorian era was that good players could monopolise the table and score hundreds of points without their opponent even getting a shot, and an end point, either a time limit or a final points target, had to be determined in advance, otherwise the game was, potentially, never-ending. Another aspect of the game to bear in mind is that cue sports have, from the outset, been associated with gambling, with the players themselves or spectators betting on the outcome of matches and patrons or sponsors putting up prize money as an incentive to good play. Varieties of the game were gradually developed which sought to narrow the gap between skillful and less skilled players, and which reached a clear end point within a few minutes of play. 2 such varieties, and these are the games which Dickens would have played, were known as life pool and black pool. The name pool comes from the practice of pooling the player's stake money in a box or a hat before the start of the game, the same meaning as in the football pools. In the game of life pool, each player was awarded 3 lives to begin with and was allocated a different coloured cue ball. The principal object was to pocket the previous player's cue ball, for which a life was lost and a forfeit was payable. Thereafter, the ball which was physically closest to the player's cue ball could be potted, again with losses of lives and forfeits, until no balls other than the player's cue ball remained on the table, or there was a non-scoring shot or a foul. Black pool was a variation introduced in 1862, in which a black object ball was placed on the centre spot and could be potted after every successful pot of an opponent's cue ball. The problems with both life pool and black pool, from surviving records of how the games were played, are that the rules are at once vague and overcomplicated, with a tape measure being repeatedly called into action. The scoring system was opaque and required a non-playing marker, and small quantities of money were constantly changing hands throughout the course of each game before the pool was finally scooped at the end. Black pool was, however, one of the 2 forerunners of modern snooker, the other being pyramids. That game was played with 15 reds and 1 white cue ball, the apex of the triangle of reds being placed on the pyramid spot, the pink spot in modern snooker. Once again, the rules were needlessly intricate, with reds being removed or replaced as penalties or forfeits, but the principal idea was that 1 point could be scored for each red ball potted. The breakthrough to modern snooker was made not in England, but in an outpost of empire, Jubalpur in India. It was there that in 1875 some bored British Army officers in the Devonshire Regiment came up with a combination of black pool and pyramids, the rules for which were drawn up with military precision by Lieutenant, later Sir Neville Chamberlain. The game was originally known as snooker's pool, from the Army slang term snooker, a derogatory name for a raw cadet. When a player was left in a position where they couldn't see the ball on, they might be referred to as a snooker, an incompetent novice. Then came the verb, "I believe I've snookered you, sir." And finally, the name of the game, which was shortened to snooker pool and then simply snooker. Now back to Dickens. In May 1865, the author wrote to William Howard Russell, the celebrated Times correspondent, who sent back vivid dispatches from the Crimean War, inviting him to Gads Hill in these convivial terms to "come down and see us. Billiards, croquet, bowls, etc. on the premises. Good beds, harmony, most evenings." It wasn't until January 1866 that Russell took up the offer, recording in his diary that the party was roughly 20 at dinner, after which the gentlemen played billiards, presumably a version of pool, until 2 in the morning. They'd have removed their dinner jackets, revealing their patterned waistcoats beneath, with a handy fob watch pocket for the chalk. And then, in a fug of cigar smoke, and with tongues well oiled by brandy, the gentlemen players would have gambled and bantered, no doubt making ribald remarks about shooting, sticks and balls, as well as innuendos based on the softer, more feminine vocabulary related to the game. The bed and the cushions, the pockets with their jaws and lips, and any physical contact, from a delicate kiss to a full-blooded deep screw. So, Dickens didn't ever play snooker, as the game hadn't been invented by the time of his death in 1870, but he was a keen player of one of the game's forerunners. In 1869 he even ordered a new floor covering for the billiard room made of kamptulicon, a patented mixture of rubber, linseed oil and powdered cork, also advertised in the parts of Our Mutual Friend, as the old covering was presumably worn out. With its combination of skill and chance, and the opportunities it afforded for both camaraderie and good-humoured rivalry, the atmosphere of the billiard table seems ideally suited to Dickens's social self. The ghost of Charles Dickens would no doubt be fascinated and intrigued by the fact that, even after the transformation of clubroom billiards into the global sport of snooker, kick-started with the commissioning of Pot Black for colour television by the then BBC Two director David Attenborough, the after-dinner dress code and etiquette of the Victorian English gentleman, whether the players involved a Chinese, Australian or Brazilian, black or white, male or female, are still preserved to this day in tournament play. And on that reassuring point, I'll break off.